John Zorn, thank you for joining the podcast.
A pleasure. Always good to
you.
see you. How you doing, man?
Great. So where do we begin?
Anywhere you like. What would you like to talk about?
I'm probably supposed to ask you about Masada, but
No, we can.
we heard this Henry Brandt piece last night, and we heard your piece for 6 trumpets, kind of unbelievable evening of music, a tribute to Butch Morris as well. And
It's nice to be at Roulette again. I haven't been there in a long time. They fixed the sound on the ceiling they put in those panels. It really helped tighten the sound up, I thought. It's good space now.
Remember the old space?
The original Roulette?
Where was the original?
The original was on West Broadway, and that's where we premiered Cobra 30 years ago.
1983?
It was like 84 October.
Uh-huh.
So 29 years ago. And it was Jim's house. And it was nice. It was really nice. John Cage would always drop by. He liked late-night concerts.
He played in your first Cobra?
I wish.
Who did play in your first Cobra?
Wow, it was Bill Frisell, Zena Parkins, Christian Marclay, Jim Staley was there, a man named Bob James, not the Bob James you know, but someone who used to do sound effects. That was great. It was a crazy band.
Wow.
So Roulette now is a beautiful big space, and they've kind of tightened the sound up, and I thought the trumpet sounded great last night.
Sounded fantastic.
Yeah.
To hear 52 trumpets, pretty amazing. But tell me a little bit about, okay, people talk all the time about the game pieces. I think there's a feeling sometimes that because you use the word game pieces, there's an aspect to it that's not serious. From having been around you as long as I have, I know that, on a certain level, of course it's life, so there's humor and there's everything, there's every emotion. But I know that the rules of those game pieces took a lot of serious consideration and thought as a composer.
Absolutely.
To come up with a way of organizing improvisers so that different situations can arise.
More than that, so that they stay interested, they stay pumped, they stay engaged, they get inspired. The job of a composer, in a way, I think of composition now as catalyst. It's something that is almost a platform for musicians to then do their thing, to feel connected, to feel that their work is being appreciated, to feel challenged, to feel, just to feel. A lot of times I find compositions shut people down. And what I try to do when I put things on a piece of paper, and ultimately that's one way that composition goes. It can also be an oral tradition, and we'll go back to that in a second, vis-a-vis the game pieces. Mm-hmm. But when you put something on a piece of paper, you should be able to give it to a musician, and they should be able to look at it, and just from looking at it, get inspired. Go, whoa, this is going to be fun to play. This is going to be a challenge. This is going to be difficult. But I have a feeling, this guy really knows what he's doing. It's going to be worth the effort. So whether you're working with improvisers or classical musicians or jazz musicians that like to negotiate changes and what have you, that want to blow at some point during the evening, or noise musicians or rock musicians, each of those communities have a different set of rules, a different set of communication skills. Rock bands a lot of times get together and work things out, in a room. Things aren't always written down. Things are memorized. Classical musicians like to have it all written down. But, when I work with rock musicians, I have things written down, but not everything. Sometimes I describe what needs to happen. That is also the case with classical, where if there's things written down, but I don't want to overmark the music to the point where someone feels like a robot. You have to leave room for interpretation. And so as composer, I feel like what I need to do again is act as a catalyst, enable people, because execution ultimately is what it's all about for me. Music is about people and how they do it, what they do, what's going on, how they feel about each other on stage. This is really important part of a musical experience to me.
Yeah.
So with the game pieces, I'm dealing with a community of improvisers. Each musician is capable of standing on stage for 45 minutes and doing a solo set of completely unique music that's their own, that they've worked out on their own. They have an idiosyncratic language that they've developed through their own practice procedures, their own pedagogy. Mm-hmm. Now, as a composer, I kind of saw my role, how can I harness this language in such a way that the musicians don't feel exploited, like I'm just stealing their language and using it, that I'm not telling them what to do, because improvisers don't like to be told what to do. They want to just play.
Right.
But also create some kind of format, some way of interacting that would never happen on its own, without the composition. The kind of sounds that happen in Cobra could never happen just in an improvised situation, so that there's a reason for them to do the piece. So that's when I started thinking about the game pieces, where and of course it comes from ideas that go back to Earl Brown, to Cornelius Cardew, possibly to Stockhausen, to a lot of ideas that were happening in the 50s and the 60s. And I kind of tied a lot of these ideas together into these structures, where, for example, duos. You look at a player and play a duo with them. Then you stop and you can do a duo with someone else. Now you have 12 musicians on stage, and you just say anybody can do duos whenever they want. Then you could have 6 different duos happening at once, or 2 happening and then 2 others happening, and then the overlap. There's all kinds of possibilities. So in the 60s, there may have been like a Fluxus piece called Duos that just had that as an instruction. It would go on for 45 minutes or an hour. What I tried to do was create a more complex series of these kind of exercises that could be called upon at any time by any of the players. It's very democratic. It's not like one person in front of the band is making the decisions, and they do what the conductor is telling them what to do.
In the case of Cobra, the prompter doesn't have that control.
The prompter is one of the players, so can make a decision, but what my idea, and why I use the word prompter, who stands in front of the band, is the prompter, as in opera. A prompter is hidden under the stage and is only there to kind of help a performer in case they get a little bit lost. The idea of the prompter is to relay information from one player to the other, because at the time, the early 80s, late 70s, there was no digital, nothing. And if you wanted to set up a series of monitors on stage where people could communicate with headphones and this and that, hugely expensive. I found, a very simple way of conveying information from one person to another in the group by using cardboard cards. I could go down to a shop and buy it for $5, cut them up, different colored signs. Each one has a different letter on it. D for duo. Yeah, exactly. Go down to Pearl. Pearl paint, boom, done. Do my little art project. And I come up,
tape, little...
the music is written on one little sheet of paper, but it's good for 1 hour, an evening of music.
Right.
And
in the right hands.
In the right hands. Well, so there's all these kind of different ideas, trades, duos, pull down beats, all these different ways of having the players interact with one another. Okay? They have to be aware all the time of what's going on. They can't just close their eyes and blow.
Right.
Things are constantly moving. There's constantly information. The prompter basically is in the front to be able to get one person's idea up and convey it to the rest of the band. But in the process, the prompter can also make decisions. But everybody in the group can make any decision they want at any time, pretty much.
Right.
That kind of, freedom was interesting to an improviser. It wasn't,
Well, it's interesting because when you talk about, I don't want to paraphrase too much, but, your music writing being about people.
Yes.
Right? And writing for a specific vocabulary.
Or a community.
A community of people.
Yes.
Who have a certain background or a certain set of practices that they use. But would you say then that the game pieces are a separate kind of community than some of the other pieces that you write for? You know what I'm asking? Does that make sense?
Well, in a way, they were written for a certain community. They came out of a certain
Specific
community.
people that were
Well,
around it.
kinds of musicians. It's possible to do Cobra with a bunch of classical players. I would say 30 years ago, I would have really resisted that because they weren't trained in improvisation. These pieces are written for improvisers. Okay. Nowadays, we have classical musicians coming out of conservatory that very much want to improvise. Maybe even they took some improv courses in their curriculum, and now I'm a little more open about letting other people get involved in the Cobra experience. But at the time, and one of the reasons that I pulled the piece away from being a public, performance piece that anybody could do, was that people did not understand that the word community was very important in the performance of this piece. What I found when I opened it up, anybody can do the piece here, go and do it, was that a lot of people used it for their own kind of ego gratification. You can obtain a certain amount of power in Cobra in making calls and enabling different musical situations, and I found people weren't thinking of the music, they were just thinking of themselves. And
well, that raises an interesting question for me. So, like, in the sense that the people that you're describing didn't play your piece well to your expectations.
There have been people who haven't.
Right, it has happened.
Yeah.
Do you find the same thing with your other pieces?
Of course.
So, for different reasons, or would you say that it's generally what you're describing is the problem, that they're taking your piece and using it for their own means?
I think that can happen in any musical situation, whether it's country music or jazz music or classical music or whatever.
Yeah.
I think, the musicians that I've been involved with that are in the various communities that I work in are open-minded musicians that understand the big picture, and they're out to make music. They're not out to get themselves off. Musicians like that are really don't belong in my scene. They're not part of the team. You've got to, it's really teamwork is what makes music exciting for me. It's about people who are working together. If there's someone in the boat that's not rowing and everybody else is rowing, that guy's got to go. I got to read him the riot act. I got to say, man, either you get with the program and you start rowing, or you're going to end up in the water, and we're going to leave you behind.
Right, but I mean, I heard your string quartet up at the Miller Theater a few months ago, your new one, and it was an unbelievable performance. I mean, everybody was activated on every level, and it was so exciting. But I didn't get the feeling like it was a moment where you were going to jump up and say, okay, you got to get off the ship. You were...
Those guys, there's no reason to say that. Not with those guys.
Even on a piece on that level, I mean, the
Let me just say that there have been
so
many cases where I've been at a rehearsal for one of my exactly written classical pieces where I felt like this is just completely not happening. They're playing all the notes. But that's not what it's about. Wow. That's just a skeleton of what the music is. For me, again, the music is people, the music is feelings. What you saw on that stage at that time at Miller was not just the notes from the piece The Alchemist. Yeah. What you saw was 4 musicians who are completely dedicated, who really care about each other in a deep, meaningful way, who love me, who love my work, and who are completely committed to delivering that to an audience. And that's what you feel when we're on stage with Masada. We love each other. And ultimately, that's what I think people are responding to when they get up on their feet at the end of the night. It's not just, that we're so virtuosic or this, that, and the other, because there are a million sax players that play better than I do. I do something unique. But I'm not the best sax player in the world, nor do I want to be. What we do is unique because of our individual interaction within the group as a whole. It's the teamwork.
And you would apply that to any
one of my situations is about teamwork. Wow. And as leader, the one who's bringing the music to you guys, again, it's my responsibility to come up with music that's going to excite you. But in addition, I have to be a good.
My initial glance is, this is going to be impossible.
And then we do it.
And then we do.
And then we do it. And then we're in the middle of doing it, I make it even more impossible.
Exactly. Well, it's usually in the course of a sound check, and then when the gig happens,
it goes up again,
and twice as fast.
Yeah, exactly, and twice as many cues, and twice as many, But see, that's the crucible. That's where I got to turn the flame up.
But I get a feeling you've always been like that.
Yes. But I've honed my skills at being a band leader over the 45 years of doing this, where I understand a little bit more about personal dynamics, group dynamics, what I'm here to do. Part of a band leader's job is sometimes to get mad at people. If things aren't right, you got to get them right. And my way of doing it is taking care of that problem immediately, not wait until, a day later. By the way, remember yesterday.
I'm familiar with that process. Part of your process. but that makes me want to ask you a question. Like, does that, you're saying, you how did you express it? Was such a good that you've gotten better at handling the dynamics.
Yes. Group dynamics, personal dynamics.
Do you feel like that goes into your writing as well? That's an influence on what you do when you're at home writing the music?
No, I think a band leading skill is a very unique skill. It's something that Greg Cohen and I have talked about this a lot, is that it's kind of a dying art. It's not something that's being taught in schools. I don't know if it can be taught. At times I've taken musicians under my wing. I'm not someone who wants to go to school and be a teacher. I don't want to really do workshops. I believe in teaching by example. But over the years, I've taken certain musicians under my wing, and I've invited them to rehearsals, invited them to mastering sessions, recording sessions. I've gone out to lunch with them. They've come to gigs. They've come backstage. They see how I work. It's kind of a hands-on approach. And I've done that, and honestly, you're either a leader or you're not. Either you have that personality or you're not. I've tried to pass down as much knowledge as I have, but I think there's a kind of personality type. You either need to have that ability to that energy, that charisma, that intensity, that, power, whatever. It's really, I don't think of myself in those terms. I just do what I got to do. But in the past few years, I've been reading more about leadership, specifically General George S. Patton, which I've been really interested in for a long, long time. And this is someone who, yes.
I want to come back to this for sure.
George S. Patton.
I want to come back to this for sure. But I just want to say that we are, you mentioned education and workshops and stuff, and so we're recording this conversation courtesy of WNYU and Brandon Peckman here, who's engineering this for us, and we're very grateful. But also because we're at NYU, I happen to be parked on University Place.
He's got to go feed the meter. The man has to feed the meter.
We're going to be in big trouble.
All right, so put a track
I brought
on.
This track that you would like to hear because you play such incredible saxophone on it. It's actually an instance in which I arranged a Masada tune that we were not recording with the quartet. So it's Greg Tardy on tenor sax, and I'm in the section on trumpet, and you're playing alto, and it's Greg Cohen and Ben Porowski on drums, and it's your piece, Vehuel. And I'll be right back.
And then back to George Patton.
well. Smoking John.
Sounds
Zorn
so
on
beautiful.
alto saxophone.
What a
How about
band
that?
that is. That's a smoking band.
Ben Porowski, Greg Cohen.
Greg
Greg
Tardy
Tardy.
is
Sounds
slamming,
great.
man. It's really beautiful. Thank you for
tempo.
including me in that. I know I resisted doing it. I didn't want to do it. I didn't think I could cut it, but
Why did you
I'm cutting
resist
it.
doing it?
I really didn't think I could cut the chart the way you wanted it to be, but it's slamming. It's beautiful, man.
I'm glad you agree with me
It's
then.
killing. It really sounds. It's at the edge. The tone is killing. Everybody sounds great, and then an alto comes out of nowhere. All of a sudden, wow, man! It's like got a little Dolphy edge in there.
You said a lot in interviews about your vocabulary as a player, that you practiced a lot back in the day, and then you got to where you wanted to be on the saxophone, and then you stopped practicing. And so all that vocabulary comes out of that time in your life when you probably did just practice obsessively all the time, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
I mean, what were you practicing? What were you doing? Where were you living, first of all?
Well,
That your neighbors didn't come and...
that is an issue, and we don't have to go into the
Okay.
details of that.
Sounds good.
But I picked up the horn when I was in. I went to St. Louis for a year or so to go to school, Webster College, and Oliver Lake was teaching there. Hemphill was teaching there. Marty Ehrlich was in St. Louis at the time. Julius Hemphill, and Luther Thomas was in school. I think he was in my same grade, and there was a lot of excitement at that time. This is 71, 2, 3, with the Black Arts Group in Chicago and the AACM. I mean, AACM in Chicago, Black Arts Group in St. Louis. Sun Ra was traveling around, and I heard For Alto by Braxton. And I'd been writing classical and just trying to, turn the flame up on that music to get more passion, more intensity. And then when I heard Braxton and a lot of Leo Smith, Roscoe Mitchell, and the Sun Ra Orchestra, I began to see that improvisation was a way of really getting that edge, getting that intensity, getting that passion happening.
But before you went to St. Louis, you were already playing saxophone.
No, I picked up the horn when I believe I picked it up when I was in St. Louis.
So those early pieces that you've released are, it's just electronics and stuff that you were doing here before you went away to college.
Some of them, and some of them had the beginnings of my sax playing.
Okay.
The very beginnings of the sax playing.
But the big practicing happened.
Big practicing
after
started then, from 72 to 82. 10 years of obsessive practice, 10 hours a day, practicing to records, playing long tones. I never really practiced extended techniques so much. That I found was best interacting with other people. I'd find people to play with, and we'd improvise. And in a way, I saw the saxophone, or being an instrumentalist, I saw as a way of meeting people, as a way of kind of a calling card, a way of saying, hey, let's get together and play. A composer comes by and says, hey, let's get together and you play my piece. It's kind of a drag. So I thought, if for me to play an instrument is a way of meeting people. And I did meet people. I'd meet people on the street. I'd hear people playing a monk tune out of a window, and I'd go knock on the door. Hey, man, you're into monk. Let's get together.
Right. Okay.
So
you could have picked guitar or.
Well, I played guitar when I was younger.
Or, all the instruments you were playing on those early recordings, and you ended up obsessing on the alto sax.
On the alto sax, and for whatever reason, it became a voice.
But did the duck calls come later?
They came much later. They came in the later 70s. As just, a way of expanding the language, the reed language. You have to remember that a duck call often uses a reed. It's a reed instrument. And now I'm playing the organ a lot, but I'm playing the pipe organ, which also is a wind instrument.
Right.
It needs to have wind going through it, and a lot of those pipes have reeds. So this is all kind of related to the wind tradition, the reed tradition.
Right.
And yeah,
So
the
back
game
up a
calls
sec.
the game calls came maybe 78, 77,
Right.
76.
So the
something like that.
obsessive practicing of the alto saxophone, you said
10
long
hours a day,
tones,
yeah.
playing along with records.
Yeah, improvising, always improvising, not reading written music. I never like to do that on the horn.
No etudes, no classical etudes.
A little bit here and there, but
Transcriptions of-
Bach, a little bit of the Bach flute things and this and that. But in general, I'd write down solos off of records, try to play along with those. It was more improvising. Really, I would say 90% of what I did on the horn, if not more, was improvising in my practice method.
But did you have a time management perspective? I mean, 10 hours is a long time.
My time management was very unique. My time management was I took the horn into the bathroom with me because I didn't want to waste any time. And I got so obsessive that I'd be playing while I was taking a leak.
Oh, man.
And eventually I started really realizing, I played for 10 hours, but I probably breathed for 4 hours of that, or 3 hours I stopped and I took a breath.
Like that was a waste.
Yeah. The breathing was away. So that's when I started the circular breathing.
Oh.
They really, it was obsessive is the word. And one day I woke up and I said, it's a beautiful day.
Right.
I'm going to go out and my practice method is now going to be living life. Going to a movie is going to be practicing. Going to a museum is going to be practicing. Going for a bike ride is going to be practicing. And I'm never going to practice the horn this way again.
But in terms of the 10 hours, I mean, was that a specific number for you, or you?
It was 8, 10. It was all day. As soon as I got up,
yeah.
I'd pull it out, and it was all day.
And you would just be improvising, but you must have you'd come across an idea, a sound idea that you'd want to get more deeply into. So
Always.
the idea of improvising in your practice became an exploration of different ways of playing, and then you would focus intently on things that maybe you couldn't do that you thought might be possible.
I think that period of focus happened on stage.
Huh.
Happened on stage.
In that same time?
In the same time period, we were, or on stage in,
Right, playing with
brackets.
people
Playing
somewhere,
with people is when the sonic explorations really went to another level. I didn't sit at home and then practice double tonguing, practice multiphonics, practice controlling
Altissimo,
squeaks and
yeah.
altissimo. I didn't really do that. Finding other kinds of fingerings and what have you. That all happened kind of in the heat of performance, playing with people, jamming. That's when that language kind of got developed. And pretty much when I was home practicing, it was the TV playing and me doing long tones, or a record playing and me playing along with the record. There was always something else going on. I never played alone, the saxophone by itself, the only sound happening.
Huh.
There was always another sound happening.
But do you think that, in these moments where you were playing with other people, where you would push yourself into these new territories, would you then the next day go, oh, there was that thing that I tried to do last night, let me go back and figure out what that is?
No.
Or was it just in the moment?
Always
whatever
in the
was
moment,
happening?
and I would remember it.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, I didn't like to write everything down because I
Well,
felt if it was important enough, I would remember it. So
But that's so different than your approach to composition. I mean, you have
Completely.
notebooks and you have a big chalkboard
Yep.
and you have everything super organized.
Yes.
And that's the only way you could run Sodic and
Yep.
do all the pieces that you do. So in your playing, there was never anything on paper.
in my playing, it was always, I
You make
think,
lists
a
for
matter.
yourself.
It was a matter of catharsis. It was a matter of, kind of emotional intensity. That's the way I play. It never became a pedagogy. It never became rigid. It never became something that I could then teach to someone else. It was something that happened in kind of an emotional crucible. And yes, that's very opposite from the way I compose, which is, very worked out and very,
organized.
very organized.
I always assumed that your approach to vocabulary on the instrument was similarly organized.
Well, there was a time in, say, 75, 6, 7, 8, when I really started developing the extended techniques on the horn, where I would make posters for concerts. And some of the posters would be graphs where there would be little kind of graphic symbols of my saxophone language. You know, the wind squeak, the harmonics, the multiphonics, this, that, and the other. But that was never anything that I used as a score. That was never anything that I used as any kind of reminder of a vocabulary. It was something I did just graphically to make a poster. But it was not written down as a lexicon or a dictionary of sounds. Everything, all of that, the whole improvisational side of my work is left for the ether.
Well, it was just in your head.
In my head, in my
reeled
genes.
Off the names of 5
sounds that we used
areas.
That we used to kind of joke about, when I want to harness a certain sound in a compositional format, like when Chadbourne was saying, do that thing you do, and I say, oh, you mean the wind squeak, week, like this kind of thing. And some of the sounds kind of were very unique, and I had little names for them, and Chadbourne and I had all kinds of little private language about different things like that. Right. So. But again, it was never regimented. It was never made into any kind of pedagogy.
Well, how much of your inspiration as a composer then comes out of that place that sounds like a very intuitive, primal sort of, not written down?
I'm not sure what to say about that. I don't. Maybe that's for someone else to answer. Maybe none. Maybe it's there somewhere.
But the experience, the physical experience of performing and playing the saxophone.
Well, what that did for me as a composer is made me understand what a performer likes to do. I think it's very important, and I think many of the greatest composers have been performers. I think it's important to understand what it is to be on stage. I think for a composer not to have that experience, not to know what that is I think you're going to miss out on a lot. And I feel like my composition has very much been influenced and affected by the fact that I'm a performer, but not on a surface level in terms of the sound or the approach. Although, as you know, a lot of times I work in blocks.
Yeah.
When I'm improvising, I'll return to certain sounds at different times, almost in an attempt to structure an improvisation in some kind of a way. You make a compositional statement out of it.
Right.
And in my written composition, it also works in blocks, and at times the blocks develop in an organic way and never repeat, and at times they do come back and repeat. So I think there's music techniques that I use both in improvising and in composing. I don't know if that is quite what you were asking.
Well, it's such a big topic. I'm not sure that we're going to solve it here.
It is interesting.
What I'm remarking on, what seems interesting to me, having played a lot of your music, or having played the Masada books with you, is that the composing is so methodical and so coming out of an intense awareness of your inner language and your resources, and a really focused use of an incredibly broad but incredibly well-organized set of parameters. And so I just always assumed that the improvising was coming from the same place. It seems of a piece.
I think my head is definitely of a piece.
That you work.
I think
you're definitely of a piece.
I'm definitely of a piece.
I don't know of what, but
I think that my conception is the same with my composing and my improvising. I think the same way. But I think the approach, I think what we've explored in this conversation that I never really thought of before is that the two approaches, although they are tied by a concept, are actually very, very on two opposite ends of the scale. One is the improv scene is completely, it is spontaneous. I'm not going to think about it before it happens. We're going to do it, and the composition is very, very carefully worked out and labored over, note by note, right, erase, change, move this here. It's interesting
because it brings us back also to the games thing, which was your way of organizing.
Organizing, improvisers.
Improvising thing, which you just described as being way out, completely unorganized.
Right.
So it's one of the things that I've remarked on before about Masada that I think is so interesting is that it brings together your composition brain and your improvisation brain.
Yeah.
And they are at these sort of opposite ends of the spectrum, and yet when they meet, it's this sparks that sort of come out of it, and it raises the band another level too. That we're not only grappling with your organized composerly thoughts, but we're also grappling with you as an improviser on the stage with us, trying to
and maybe that combination of the two things at once is what people really respond to, why they really like to see me on stage with a group rather than compositions where I'm not on stage. I think after many, many years of trying to get people to understand that I can get a band on stage without me playing and it's still going to kill and be 110%, I think I've made some headway. But nevertheless, one really flattering example, if I may say it, it was in some review or some blog somewhere of one of these European gigs that we've been doing this year, the Zorn at 60, which starts with the Song Project, and then there's the piece for piano, bass, and drums that's all written, and then there's the Holy Visions for 5 voices, and then there's the Alchemist String Quartet, and then Moonchild comes out with Mike Patton, and there's an amazing rock set for 4 musicians. Then the Dreamers come out and do this beautiful set, and then Electric Masada comes out, and then I finally come out with the horn at the end. And I come out and I play with Electric Masada, and we do 15 minutes or 20 minutes, something like that. And this woman saw all of this music and was like, wow, this stuff was so amazing. But when that guy got up on stage with his band, you just could immediately see the power that this guy was wielding.
Oh, great.
Just, in terms of the cueing, in terms of everybody watching me, in terms of, again, the community and the respect that I have and the loyalty that I've earned and that I show to other musicians. I think that was really
great.
It was really great to read that, because I don't think of myself as an amazing sax player. I use it as a tool in a way.
To that end, can I play a track? Just a short
Always
track
love
music?
to play tracks.
So, just to tie off this aspect of the conversation, I want to play something from Classic Guide to Strategy, the solo record that you made many years ago.
Yeah, and just 30 seconds on that, it's interesting, I've never written a piece for myself to play solo sax. It's always complete improv.
So it's completely improvised. It's also, there's no overdubs and no splicing or anything.
Yes.
Right? It's all live.
All live.
So I want to play this track, Kondo Toshinori, which I guess is dedicated to...
To Kondo Toshinori, yeah, a dear friend of mine, a trumpet player.
About the piece, or why? Not really. So, and was this all alto saxophone?
I can't remember which this is. I think there's a lot of game calls on this.
And maybe I'll ask you one more question, then we'll go on to George Patton.
Beautiful.
We're back. Classic guide to strategy.
I don't know if you can ever come back after that. I don't know. We're someplace else now, man.
I was snapping my fingers over here, tap dancing, and had my top hat and cane, ready to go.
It's definitely unique. I think that's the music that, Pat Metheny said he heard when he was driving his car, and he had to pull up on the side of the road to listen to it. And then he called the station and said, "What is going on there?" Wow. There's certainly a lot of focus. That is definitely a level of virtuosity that I could never get to again with those game calls. I'm moving so quickly.
So it's the end of that period we were talking about.
Yeah,
Before we played it, you weren't sure whether it was game calls and saxophone.
This is definitely both.
Confirmed that you must have had a table with all the stuff laid out.
Always a table, and it was laid out in a very kind of methodical way. Everything always was in the same place when I did these performances. There was like a towel, and then all those calls always in the same place, kind of categorized. The goose calls over here, this and that, and then a small bowl of water. Right. And the sax in my lap. Yeah. And mouthpieces over here. And man, but I'm going from thing to thing,
really
fast. Lightning fast. I can't even believe it. But every one of those techniques, I still know how to make all those sounds.
That's great.
It's very visual to me when I hear those sounds. That's something else.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing. But I mean, that's what I was talking about when I said all that stuff that you practiced. That still
never practiced any of that. None of that was ever practiced at home. All of those techniques happened in improvising with people.
With people. So what made you want to do a solo record then?
Well, that's a challenge, isn't it? That's one of the things that you need to do. That's like writing a string quartet. You need to do that. Writing you need to do that. So that's what I did.
Interesting. And was that piece a response to Kondo Toshinori in any way, would you say, now that you've been listening to it again?
Does it remind me of Kondo?
Well, was it a dedication for him in any specific programmatic way?
I can't hear that
Not
quite
really.
so well.
But you were playing with him at the time, and
yeah, before that, I think he had gone back to Japan by then. But yeah, he was a good friend and an amazing trumpet player, incredible trumpet player.
and made a beautiful solo record of his own.
Did indeed.
Wow, interesting. Okay, so I have promised that I was going to ask you about General George Patton, and I feel like I'll be letting my podcast listeners down if I don't.
Well,
So,
I'm in enough trouble as it is, man.
No, not the movie. We were talking about band leading. We were talking about.
Well, like Ben Young
leading
asked
a
me.
group of
Yeah, Ben
musicians.
Young asked me up at KCR last week. I was there with Phil Shapp and Ben Young, and
Amazing.
we
I'd heard that.
We did some good radio, man. Some good radio. And Ben's at the end of the whole. No, it wasn't at the end of the program. It was when Phil he had his first hour, and then Ben took over, and then he asked about who was inspiring as a band leader. And he expected me to say, Duke Ellington, or I said Miles Davis. I said, well, I'm going to surprise you, but as far as being a leader, the most inspiring person to me, the person I've gotten the most out of, is General George Patton. And he was like, yeah, I am surprised.
He had a great big band.
One of those territory groups in the 30s, man, of Texas.
A
Man.
lot of territory.
Well, Patton has written a lot about leadership, and how to inspire groups, and how to earn loyalty, and how to take care of the groups, and how to share suffering, and how to lead from the front, not push from the back. I mean, these are all very simple things, but very profound. And I'm still doing a lot of reading of his writings and biographies. And when I'm on the road with 30, 40 cats in the band, and I've really got to keep people under control, I think about that, because it reminds me that I'm part of a team, and that I have responsibility, and that everybody else has responsibility. And if someone, again, is not rowing the boat, or if someone has a disharmonious disposition, I've got to roll them right out of the organization.
Any particular book that you would recommend?
To people,
of the Patton writings?
anything about him is really going to be
Books
interesting.
about him, like his
Books about it.
biography.
Yes, there was people that actually rolled with him. There's a guy, Porter Williamson, who wrote a book, General Patton's Principles, I think it's called. There's a silly book that's actually got a lot of great quotes in it. That's something like, strategic lessons on leadership from George Patton, that's kind of aimed at a business crowd or something, the way a lot of businessmen, I think, in the 80s started reading, the Book of Five Rings, The Art of War, these kind of tactical...
Sun Tzu.
Yeah. And the battle is won before the first shot is fired. This is true of music as well. The musical concert is successful even before, we even have to play a note. I know that it's going to slam. Like we're playing a Masada marathon on Sunday. I don't know when this podcast will actually become, but on the 15th of September.
This may probably after that. But
Okay, but I know that it's not
quite a number.
We've done a number of them.
They're always great.
I know all the musicians. I know that I can rely on them. I know how to put them in in the right sequence. Sequencing things is also something that's that I'm very adept at, putting things in a proper sequence so that they kind of always things sound fresh. So, you put the band together, you give them enough time to rehearse, you make sure that they have, they're comfortable, they have dry socks.
Right.
Right.
Care, feeding, and maintenance.
It's all part of
And
the
a
job.
Good meal.
Good meal. And then when it's time for me to get up there and play, I have to slam it. I have to be inspiring.
Everybody else has to too. They know they have to rise
I've got to
the
bring them up
occasion.
because only if I can do it. If I fall on my face, forget it. The whole thing falls apart. So it's like, you have to practice what you preach. You have to really be able to back it up.
Isn't there an Eddie Harris book that you used to talk about band leading?
No,
Is
that was like a bunch of
was like
of
an
jokes.
astrological-
Yeah, it was more like a bunch of jokes.
Okay, all right, but you had some, which
The quote I remember-
they won't be repeated here unless you want.
No,
to,
the one quote he had about the Virgo band leader.
Virgo band leader.
The Virgo band leader is someone who will make you work harder than you ever worked in your whole life while he coasts. But I have amended that because I know that I can't coast. When I go out, with these 5-hour shows with 40 people, I work 15 hours straight, nonstop, no rest, no food. And I deliberately don't take food.
Can't believe it.
I don't take food deliberately because I know a lot of cats out there maybe don't have time to get the food here and there. I'm not going to treat myself to something that other people can't treat themselves to. I have to set an example. So I've got to constantly be full of energy. I've got to be positive. I have to have all the answers at all the times. Attack, attack, attack. Just constantly move forward.
I want to play a track from a very recent CD, and maybe we'll just listen to a little bit of this piece. But this is this Rimbaud CD that
It's one of my favorites.
is out recently with 4 different pieces on it. But we'll listen to just a little bit of Illuminations. So we just listened to a small piece of Illuminations, but I think, I don't know, you know.
Well, that piece is unique because it's the first time this is such a simple formula.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me that it never happened before. The piano part is completely written,
Right.
and the bass and drums improvise along with the piano.
You know
So
who
in a
did
way,
that?
who did do
Only
that?
one person that I know of is Mary Lou Williams.
Did she do that?
Made a record where she composed another piano part for a classical pianist, and then she improvised along with it.
Oh, but she on piano. Two
Played
pianos.
two pianos.
Two pianos. But bass and
One-
drums, yeah.
No, just duo.
Okay, that's
so this
cool.
is really interesting because it's Stephen Gosling, an incredible,
Amazing.
classical pianist,
Yeah.
and so he's reading here.
Yeah.
And then in the rhythm section, it's Trevor Dunn and Kenny Wollesen.
Right.
And completely improvised? Or
Well,
some
you know,
instruction,
again,
or-
you know, as with anything, you know, when we play a Masada tune, we play the head, and then we don't just go do whatever we want. We do what's appropriate for the framework that melody or that initial head implies. We follow through.
Right.
The same thing with this. I kind of described to Kenny and Trevor as if they were playing like a big band chart.
Mm-hmm.
It's all written, and you got to support what's happening in the big band. And the big band, of course, is the piano, and it's all there. But there's a million.
Listen in advance to the piano player?
Yes, they listened a lot, and Trevor actually came in with detailed notes of harmonically where he wanted to go.
Great.
And Kenny was really prepared on where to stop, where to start. But I said, you know, you can go into time, you could just play open, you can go, maybe here go to brushes, maybe here use sticks, maybe, you know, we talked about different things here and there.
That's great.
But ultimately what's happening is they're kind of like following the piano part, but not too slavishly where it becomes boring. They're going against it at times. They're, you know, improvising, but improvising with taste.
As you're talking about it, there's a little corollary, and I don't know, this might be way off base, but you tell me. Like the early Ornette Coleman quartets, when Ornette Coleman and Don Cherry play those melodies, I don't think that Ornette wrote parts for the rhythm section.
I'm sure he didn't.
Charlie Hayden
Yeah.
and Billy Higgins or Ed Blackwell would figure out what to do, and they've figured out something really brilliant.
I'm not sure whether Ornette had instructions for them or whether they just came up with their own parts. That I'm not clear on.
Right, and sometimes the way that the rhythm section parts work with the written stuff is really counterintuitive.
Astonished. Yes, completely.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And so in a way, you know, that's in a much smaller format. In the case of this piece,
It's a long
piano's written
15-minute
all the way
head.
through, yeah.
Well, you know, again, what I was thinking of is something that's going to gas the players.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that, you know, that seat sitting in Illuminations, either as a drummer or a bass player, is a very exciting seat to sit in.
And for the piano player as
And
well.
for the piano player, after he
Different
did
kinds of
this,
players,
Steve was like, "Man, I should have bass and drums at every gig I do. This is amazing." Like he was really stoked. He never played like that before.
Wow.
So it was something that was very exciting for the players. And again, as a role as composer is to come up with something that excites the players and acts again as a catalyst and platform for them to do what they do best.
And it creates this piece that's sort of in its own world.
It is.
For us outside as the listener, it's just kind of like, okay, here's a new thing that I have to figure out what is going on.
A lot of people
now.
thought the piano was all improvised.
Right.
You know, and then I say, well,
in
by the way,
in your piano concerto, I remember I heard it on the radio one night, and I was like, okay, wait a minute, you know, because there's a long section where it sounds like the person is soloing and improvising, and it's all written.
it's all written. In fact, Alvin Singleton, who a very dear friend and great composer who teaches down, I'm not sure where he's teaching right now, but he had a course on improvisation and composition, and he told me, oh, I'm teaching your piece of Porias, the piano concerto, in my improvisation course. And I said, I don't understand. What do you mean? He said, well, at the improvisation, the piano. I said, Alvin, the piano is all written, every note. He went, what?
Okay, so now we'll play a little bit of that, too. Vaporous, beautiful music. Speaking of band leading and thinking of new contexts and different things to do, I want to close out and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me,
we'll
Dave.
Have to do it again. I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
There's just so much to talk about. It's always a pleasure to
Do
talk
some
to
more.
you. Always interesting. But please.
But I'm going to play the first track of your Naked City record, Absinthe. Anything you want to say about that?
This is interesting because Naked City had done a lot of different things up to this point. This was, I think, the last record that we had made. We had covered classical music, movie soundtracks. We did all those kind of short hardcore punk things. We did the radio record, which is kind of related to the kind of Dreamers pieces that I'm doing now. We did a whole improvised record. We really covered a lot of ground. And everyone used to joke about the Naked City Quartet because, again, you know, the Virgo Bandleader, I would not really play very much. They would be doing all the playing. And we went into the studio. I wanted to do a real audiophile record. And I think Joe Furler recorded this one. And we went to Electric Ladyland, and we did it on reel-to-reel, like analog. It was like really serious. And the project for this was to do a record where there was no notes, per se. There were no chords, it was all sounds. I wanted to do something that was all kind of textural. And the music was written, it was all written down, and I needed to explain the techniques. I had Joey. Joey didn't touch the drum set the whole session.
Right.
We went shopping on Canal Street to get his setup, which was,
Right.
A bunch of, metal BBs and nails, ball bearings, all these different, all these different kinds of objects that he was manipulating. And for Frizzell, for this first piece, I had Frizzell restring his guitar with all E strings, tuned within the space of a minor or major second, 6 microtones between that. And he's doing that, and Frith is doing that as well. He had a different tuning on his bass, on the bass, and Frizzell did a kind of solo using that E-string guitar. He fell in love with that guitar, and he used it later on some of his own records. But he did some really amazing playing on this, and yeah, it's a really beautiful track.
Thanks, man.
All right.
All right, John.
Ba-boom.